It's always hard to follow your mother. So. My mom earlier gave me the LEPOCO pin, of which I actually have many somewhere in the attic at their house. But this one says, question authority, not your mother. So, I won't dare question your mother. I also should mention, it's a little weird standing up here, I'm not about to give a sermon, so if I start to be too sermony, somebody give a hand signal and I'll stop. One last thing I should mention, I am the advocacy director for a coalition called Win Without War, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that here we are in United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church is one of our coalition members. It's one of the great churches that's advocated for peace throughout the years, and it's nice to be here in such an important place, so I'm happy that LEPOCO picked this location. First of all, thank you very much to my mom for that loving introduction. Thank you to Nancy, Adam, the entire LEPOCO family. As my mother mentioned, in 3 weeks exactly from tonight, I'm getting married, and so I have a fine appreciation for how hard it is to put on an event of this size. So thank you particularly to the folks who helped pull tonight together. It was a wonderful event. When I was a kid, I volunteered with LEPOCO, as been mentioned, making lemonade, and I never imagined I would be back here tonight giving this speech. So I guess sometimes you can come home again. This evening I'd like to talk a little bit about fighting for peace in the 21st century. As long as there's been war, there's been those working to make peace. In his masterpiece on World War I, Adam Hochschild wrote the story of advocates for peace in one of the 20th century's darkest hours. While Europe literally tore itself apart, sending an entire generation of young men to their deaths in the trenches on the Western Front, there were those fighting for peace. While nationalism fueled bloodletting on an industrial scale, there were those who stood up for our shared humanity against the insanity of a war for which there was little purpose, and to try to bring peace and an end to that bloodshed. A century later, we look back on a historical record that catalogs in excruciating detail every general and admiral, every weapon that the men under their command used in combat, and every battlefield on which so many millions of them perished. That same history often ignores the legacy of those who struggled tirelessly in the pursuit of peace, and it seldom mentions their names. Part of my message to you this evening is that a 21st century peace movement stands on the shoulders of giants, and we must reclaim that history and tell the story of peace. Frankly, one of the things it stands on is groups like this that have been advocating for decades, and I'm very, very proud to stand up here as you guys begin your 50th year. Whether it was those struggling to end the senseless slaughter of World War I, those fighting for the countless victims on 1,000 battles whose only purpose was the struggle between two world superpowers locked in a Cold War, or those working to end the killings in fields, in the jungles of Vietnam, the villages of Central America, and the deserts of Iraq, you and those who came before you have never stopped fighting for peace. As we stand here today, on the final day of Black History Month, it is worth remembering that the great champion of American civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, was also a champion for peace. And as we think ahead about our future as a peace movement, I think we should remember his words, that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. Dr. King was, of course, part of the great peace movement that defined the latter half of the 20th century, the struggle against the Vietnam War. That same struggle gave birth to this organization, and was an important defining feature in many people's lives. Many in this room were part of that struggle, and this year, not only does LEPOCO begin its 50th year, but we mark the 50th anniversary of the escalation of the Vietnam War. As we do that, we find ourselves, sadly, once again, mired in a military quagmire in a far-off land. Our latest war is a return to the battlefield that launched my personal journey into the peace movement. I mentioned earlier, and my mother mentioned in her remarks, I was probably a little predisposed to work in the peace movement, having been a volunteer and worked with LEPOCO as a child. In addition to my fond memories of lemonade, I remember well lighting candles and floating them down the Monocacy to commemorate the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And anyone who knows my parents, or heard about them moments ago, probably could have guessed that I would end up working in politics, and probably as a liberal. Well, I won't bore you this evening with the specifics of my own journey. I will take a moment to reflect, for me, on how I got here, and some of the defining features of it, because I think it's illuminative about how we go forward. For me, as for much of my generation, I came of age right around the attacks of September 11th. Like so many others, that day and those attacks brought a host of emotions for me. Yet for me, the full impact came not only watching the horrors of those towers fall and the planes burning in fields, but also watching my country not respond by dragging itself into not only one, but 2 wars. Like so many other Americans, I was afraid and shocked by the attacks. Yet also, I was troubled by the massive military might that was unleashed in my name in response. I was shocked as our president, used our collective fear to launch our nation into war in Iraq, a country that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. I was also deeply saddened to see the deaths of thousands of American troops and untold numbers of Iraqis and Afghans as they were added to the death toll of that fateful morning in September. Yet eventually, our nation, and more specifically the peace movement, helped to turn the tide on those conflicts. We first elected a Congress and then a president who ran on the explicit promise of ending wars. At that point, many of us thought our work had been done. I know not the good folks in this room, but many other Americans thought their work was done. They thought they could turn their attention back to problems here at home, from our crumbling economy to our dying planet. But unfortunately, history has shown us, and the last several years have shown us, that we weren't done, and that we need a peace movement now more than ever. During the Obama years, from the surge in Afghanistan to the expansion of the drone war, to the war in Libya, to unfortunately now the renewed war in Iraq and the expansion of that war into Syria, we need a peace movement today, now more than ever. Yet we face challenges, some of them familiar, some of them new, as we begin to confront these conflicts. I'd like to spend the rest of my time in my prepared remarks, and we're going to do some questions, so save your time for questions. I want to talk a little bit about what we need to do to create a 21st century peace movement. And I'd like to highlight 3 challenges that I see. There are many, many more, we can talk about them, but I want to highlight 3. First, Americans are rightly afraid by the horrific images that they see on their televisions beamed back to them from halfway around the world. And in an era when a single individual can unleash massive amounts of death and destruction, Americans feel insecure even in their homes. Second, we have a desire to heal the suffering we see around the world. We see endless amounts of conflict, and we see violence on massive scale unleashed around people around the world. And we want to do something about that. Unfortunately, our desire to do something often comes in direct confrontation with our limited understanding of those same conflicts and our limited ability to make positive impact without simply adding fuel to the fire. And finally, decades and decades of overinvesting in our military here in the United States and underinvesting in nearly every other tool of American foreign policy has left us with few options when there is something that we all agree we should do something about in a way that we agree to do it. We simply don't have any options. So I want to say a few more words about how we can begin to confront these challenges. First, a little more about fear. Fear is a powerful, powerful force. It took us more than 5 years as a country to get past the shock of 9/11 and the fear-mongering the Bush administration used to great impact. In an age when every week seems to bring a new horror, from beheadings to individuals being burned alive, we are sailing against powerful headwinds when we are trying to bring about peace. We also need to understand security. Once you get past this fear, our fellow Americans still want to be safe. Too often our answers to them fail to show them and show our neighbors how they will be protected, how they will be better protected if they pursue peace. When this fear and this lack of security is combined, you have the recipe for America to be led to war. I want to give an example from my current work, and I'm happy to talk about individual issues. I've been trying to keep it broader strokes here in the beginning, but in our current work going on right now around the war in Iraq and Syria, we have a really fascinating case study with the horror that is ISIS or the Islamic State or Daesh, or there's lots of different variants, but the group of individuals that we commonly call ISIS. Americans, when they think of this group, are horrified. They're very afraid. Public opinion polling indicates that Americans simply view this group of individuals, rightly or wrongly, as the same thing as Al-Qaeda, but only worse. They think, however, that bombing them will not make the problem better. That even if you could kill every last one of them, something worse would replace them. Yet they don't know what else to do. And so they're left, because of the fear-mongering, because of the lack of options, to support the bombing. That brings us back to my second point. Our solutions are lacking. We have to be honest that as a peace movement, we need to do better. We have ceded too much ground in the national debate to simply two camps, one warmongers, the other isolationists. We believe in a different way forward, and we need to be better at articulating the options, the path forward, and the alternatives. Americans are desperate for alternatives, and we need to give them to them. But we have to also understand that part of our challenge is the answers are hard, and we should acknowledge this. Too often our quest for quick and easy answers, particularly those of us who work in Washington and are always looking for things that can be said in 30-second sound bites, leaves us lacking with the honest answer that it is complicated and the solutions are difficult. Oftentimes we simply fail to understand the crisis and the conflict in a way that simply is inevitable when we are trying to do so from thousands of miles away. The solutions that the individuals on the ground in those conflicts and the experts around the world talking about them propose are often messy and quite slow. They don't match well with the 21st century news cycle that wants a new story every day. And we have to confront the challenge that we are inherently making difficult choices and often are weighing the consequences and the cost of protecting a life today versus the consequences of the cost of realizing that protecting that life today may cost more lives in the future. The most obvious example is that the latest bombing in Iraq and Syria started with the trapping of some folks called the Yazidis on a mountainside in in northern Iraq. These individuals, Americans wanted to save. They were trapped by marauding lunatics, and people wanted to save them. The military might that was unleashed to do so has led to more suffering, more death. And finally, and this is sometimes hard for us to admit as a peace movement, Americans really like America. They believe strongly in American exceptionalism and that America is a force for good in the world. And while they understand that there are exceptions to that, they believe that at their core, and it is very hard for them to accept, as is often the case, that we are making the problem worse. Finally, I mentioned the overinvestment in our military. We simply have nothing left in our toolbox as a country other than a hammer. America spends more today on our military than at any time in our history. At any time. Yet we continue, at the same time, to slash our investments in nearly every other corner of government, and particularly in the other avenues of foreign policy and national security spending. It is time that we as Americans recognize that in a globalized world, we all do better and we're all more secure when we all do better and we're more secure. If you have countries with youth unemployment over 50%, you will have civil strife and conflict. If you have countries, as you have in Yemen, where water is literally running out, and in less than a lifetime, there will be no water in the entire country because of climate change, you will have conflict. Yet we continue, as a country, to address all these conflicts by throwing money at the military. And if you need an example of this, look no further than when we tried as a nation to confront the horrors of the Ebola outbreak last year. What did we do? We sent in the Marines. We can change this. It starts with you, and you've all taken the first step. Many of you have taken many steps along the road, but you've taken the first step. And so I want to begin my uplifting part of this evening's remarks by encouraging you to continue the work that you are doing. Continue to share the messages that you and that LEPOCO espouses. Continue to talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, talk to your friends. Tell them there is another way. It's also worth remembering that we have confronted these challenges before and we have overcome them. Not that long ago, in 2013, the United States stood prepared with fuel in our fighter jets to bomb Syria. We were ready, and we were hours away from launching a military campaign in response to the alleged use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime. Something happened. What was considered a done deal in Washington was undone by you and the American public. Millions of Americans across the country picked up their phones, they went to their congressman and women's office, they went on to news stations, had town vigils, had meetings with their members of Congress in their districts in Washington, and they demanded that we not bomb, that we find another way. And before a single American bomb fell on the conflict, we did find another way, and today Syria's chemical weapons have been destroyed. Unfortunately, we all know that that's not the end of that story, that a little over a year later, American bombs were falling on Syria for different reasons. But this should be not a reason to be sad, but a reason to redouble our efforts. We know that we can, as a peace movement, enact meaningful and significant change, but it's up to us to do it. We have tools like we've never had before in the age of the internet. We have the ability in the age of multi-million-dollar super PACs to do something that all that money can't do, which is put a face on a meeting with a member of Congress that changes their mind. We have far more power today than we have ever had, and it's up to us to use it. I want to end the prepared remarks and then have some questions by quoting one of the bumper stickers outside. You know, when I saw them, I had this instant flashback to remembering all the bumper stickers when I was a child and remembering all the buttons, and I really do have a large collection of all of them somewhere that I'd like to dig out. But I think as we look back and find ourselves yet again, as we prepare to enter the 15th year of war since 9/11, as we come up on the 12th anniversary of the Iraq War, finding ourselves back in Iraq, we have to remember the words out in the hallway. Don't mourn, organize. It is up to us to change, and we can do it. Thank you all.
So Steve is willing to take some questions, and I'm going to sort of help us out. So, questions? Is that Ted Morgan? Yes, Ted.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the jobs is reaching out to the rest of the public. And it came to my attention fairly recently that there are 22 suicides a day among the veterans. And it strikes me that reaching out to the veteran community and the public that supports the soldiers is one avenue to build a strong movement. What you thought?
So I didn't mention very much about what I do in my day job, but this is a good way to segue into that. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the advocacy director for something called the Win Without War Coalition. It's a coalition of about 36 national organizations, all of them multi-issue organizations that work on various issues in their day-to-day. We coordinate their work on these issues of war and peace. It was founded in the run-up to the Iraq War. And this is a long way of saying that a key part of that community is a veterans organization, Veterans for Peace. We also do a lot of work with other veterans organizations. And quite often, the most vocal advocates for peace are veterans. The men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, done multiple tours there, are usually the first to know that there's a different way, that there's another option. One of the things that happened during the Bush years that was beyond repugnant was the use of American support for the soldiers to justify and wrap themselves in the flag by certain politicians some pretty reprehensible political choices. It was difficult for us as a peace movement because quite often we got labeled with being anti-troop. In an era when almost every institution in Congress has an approval rating that looks more like a batting average, the American troops remain the most trusted institution. So So being wrapped in the flag of being anti-troop was pretty damaging. And as I said earlier, it took us several years to overcome that. We need to reach out and as peace activists, do so at the direct level with veterans organizations, with local VFW halls, not just the Veterans Peace Organization. Have the honest conversations that come to realizations that we all support the same thing, safe and secure America, that we don't want to send our troops into harm's way, partly because we like our troops and we'd rather them not get killed in conflicts that don't really have much of a purpose. Quite often we will find, and you will find when you reach out to veterans, when you talk to them, that they will be the strongest advocates for peace. So I think it's a good advocation, and it's something that not only can happen in Washington, like some of the work, but really does happen best around the country in small group gatherings and reaching out and having those one-on-one conversations and building friendships.
I see some other hands. Yes.
Pair of glasses were found by the door, the north left corner of the building by the door.
Very good.
It's the easiest question.
Yeah.
Hi, Stephen. So it seems like we might have an opportunity for something with the negotiations going on with Iran. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The negotiations with Iran is one of the things that I spend most of my time on these days. You know, never before have we had a chance to avoid a war before it starts greater than the chance we have with Iran. The folks who right now are fighting to kill off diplomacy in the talks have made it clear when they're behind closed doors and when they're writing white papers that they won't get picked up in the press, that their real goal is regime change, and that what they want to do is have violent regime change. They liked the Iraq war so much they want to play that game over again in Iran. The way we avoid that is by peaceful negotiations, and we have a president that's committed to them. We have an international community that's fully on board with them. And frankly, one of the only things standing in the way of success is the American Congress that seems hell-bent on destroying them. You know, in a couple of days, a gentleman is going to get up in Congress and give a speech that's designed to do one thing and one thing only: kill the negotiations with Iran. When Prime Minister Netanyahu addresses Congress, it is not to try to end the Iranian nuclear program. It is to try to end the talks with Iran over its nuclear program. Now, say what you will about the diplomatic protocol violations, and there's a lot to say about that. Say what you will about the partisan attack job that John Boehner and Mitch McConnell cooked up to arrange the speech. It should be deeply troubling to anyone who cares about America's security that here, when we have the opportunity to take one of the biggest security threats potentially out there, which would be an Iranian nuclear bomb, and we can get into the reality that the Iranians haven't decided to actually pursue a nuclear weapon, but setting that aside, an Iranian nuclear weapon, the arms race it would trigger in the Middle East, the potential for military conflict, that's a very real security threat for America and for Israel. We have a chance to solve that without a single bomb being dropped. And someone's going to Congress next week to try to stop that solution before it's implemented. That should be deeply troubling. It's worth noting for those who don't follow politics that I know everyone in this room does follow politics, so I won't belabor this point. It is a new level of partisanship in Washington that we've achieved and is demonstrated by this speech. You know, the old adage that politics stops at the water's edge was probably never true. But it used to at least be true that even when Republicans and Democrats were fighting amongst each other, that they both kind of wanted to, you know, at least in their own theory of what it meant to keep America safe, to actually keep America safe. The Israeli ambassador to the United States is a gentleman named Ron Dermer. His start in politics came working for a gentleman some folks might know, Frank Lutz, who's a Republican pollster, who happens also right now to be Bibi Netanyahu's pollster, working on something called the Contract for America for Newt Gingrich. That's the individual who helped concoct this speech in Washington. It is a partisan political attempt to undermine a president by a group of people who would rather see this president fail than America solve its greatest national security threat, and in the process avoid a war that would be bigger than Iraq and Afghanistan combined. It is something that should shock the conscience of all of us. It thankfully is something that has shocked most people, and the fact that it hasn't shocked all of Congress is a testament to the fact that we have a lot more work to do. It is worth noting that for the first time maybe ever, you will see significant numbers of Democrats and significant individuals within the Democratic caucus boycotting the Prime Minister of Israel's speech. Icons of Congress like John Lewis, Jewish members of Congress like Steve Cohen and Jan Schakowsky, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, they will not be going to this speech. This is uncharted waters we're in with these talks, and it speaks to the moment that we're in right now on the Iranian nuclear issue. And so one of the kind of specific messages I'll give today is to watch this space. Those of you here in Congressman Dent's district, Congressman Dent has previously actually been very good on this issue. A year and a half ago, he led a letter with 100 other members of Congress that said, we should give President Rouhani a chance to sit at the negotiating table before we slap new sanctions on. After he did that, Congressman Dent was ruthlessly attacked by folks on the right, and he has since backed off in his support for diplomacy. It would behoove everyone who lives in Congressman Dent's district to remind him that there are people who live here who support diplomacy, and hope that he will continue to do so in the future.
So I hope you all know a phone number for Congressman Dent. I'm going to be calling next week. And do we have another question? Yes, great.
This harkens back to the gentleman who mentioned about the veterans committing suicide. I'm a visiting nurse, and this is more of a basic at-home question. I find that now we tend to not know our neighbors. We tend to be very isolated. We're very suspicious. We're less inclined to say hello, less inclined to make that connection. I think that's where peace begins, is in our own neighborhood. And I was just wondering if you had suggestions or insights or opinions about how things have changed since we were young, hanging clotheslines in the backyard and running around and having more conversations over the back fence versus this kind of, I just have these leaders on, I'm just going to get in my house and I'm not going to talk to anybody.
So not wanting to get into the whole broader sociological discourse, which is there's many books about it. It is undoubtedly true that Americans are not as connected to their communities and subsequently their neighbors as they used to be. There's people are kind of the irony of the information age is we're all more connected, and in the process we're less connected to one another. Being on Facebook and liking a status or seeing a friend share a post is not the same as talking to them while you're waiting at a bus stop or talking to them at the lunch counter down the street. But it is still the fact that we all are members of communities. Some of us go to houses of worship, some of us go to schools, some of us go to workplaces. We all have people that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. In my former life, before I was a do-gooder peace activist, I was a bit of a political hack running campaigns. And the numbers on this are astounding. That the amount of energy, time, and money that you have to spend to try to convince someone to vote for someone depends on the means with which you're doing it. And the number one way campaigns do, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone, is to run television ads. After that, you guys get phone calls. I'm sure folks get robocalls. You get pieces of mail. They're all along a spectrum of how often you have to do them. You have to see the average television ad a couple dozen times before it sinks in. You have to call a couple hundred people to move one vote. Talking door to door, you move one vote, 1 out of every 14 people that someone talks to. That's an order of magnitude more impactful than any other form of contact with voters. It's actually, coincidentally, for those curious, it's the thing the Obama campaign fundamentally did different than any other campaign in history. it brought into an industrial scale the ability to talk door to door to voters directly. And the thing they did in their 2012 campaign that was remarkable was they married that with technology to know not only who you could talk to, but creepily, in a way, if I'm honest, to tell you who you knew that was undecided and have you talk to them. And it was tremendously impactful, and it's how Barack Obama ended up getting more votes despite Mitt Romney spending a lot more money than him. The point being, it is still by far the most impactful thing we do when we talk to one another, no matter what the setting, no matter how long. And one of the reasons it's so impactful is because we live in that isolation, because we're constantly bombarded in the media with certain messages of a certain debate, right? So if you watch Fox News, or even if you watch CNN or MSNBC, you hear one version of a debate. And if you think outside of that message that you're hearing, and this is increasingly true as Americans get sucked into siloed media, whether it's conservative media, liberal media, what have you. If you think outside that, you tend to think you're the only one who thinks that. So it may be that you're sitting at your desk, your friend is sitting at their desk, and all they're hearing is about yet more beheadings in Iraq and Syria. All they're hearing is general after general on TV, retired general, I should say, on television, talking about the efficacy of military strikes and how good special forces would be if we sent them in, or maybe if we had 10,000 troops, how things would be different. And you begin to think, maybe I'm the only one who thinks that we shouldn't be bombing. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks when you're in a hole, stop digging. But if you talk to them and you let them know, hey, I'm thinking this too, suddenly they're going to realize they're not alone. And that's the first step to organizing. That's the first step to getting people active. And so that's why it's so important to continue to build from the core you have and to spread out. Because we need to convince the vast, vast, vast millions of Americans who agree with us, but who don't pick up the phone and call their congressman, who don't come to those candlelight vigils, who don't ever speak up and have their voice heard, that they need to speak up and have their voice heard.
Let's see, okay, we'll take one more question, I think. Dave.
I work in a school, and there are recruiters who come into the school. But more than that, there is the message from the administration that what we're doing in the school is helping students prepare themselves either for field of work, to go on, continue their education, for the military. I mean, the military is clearly presented as probably the only option for community service to these students in a public way. What would be the best way to counteract that? I mean, one of the things would be is to come up with some sort of community service option that would be promoted. It's not just the recruiters who are promoting the military, it's actually the administration a lot of times. What do we do about that?
It's a tough one. And it's worth remembering that when we talk about the disproportionate amount of money that we spend in this country on the military, it doesn't only manifest itself in buying kind of multi-billion-dollar weapon systems. It manifests itself in the military being able to buy multi-million-dollar advertising contracts, sponsor everything from NASCAR to professional basketball. Those messages are hard to overcome, and they are very, very, very powerful. But I think it begins with where I started my comments, and the reason I wanted to specifically mention in talking about a 21st century peace movement, that we owe it to ourselves to remember that we had a 20th century peace movement. We need to remember that we need to hold up voices and talk about heroes of the peace movement, folks who were involved in trying to end wars, not just those who were involved in fighting them. We need to insist. There's a great little story. The Department of Defense gives itself $25 million to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And they announced they were going to have a multi-year program. They were going to come up with a curriculum for schools. They were going to have all these great big events. They were going to talk about it. And a couple of people who had been involved in that time period, folks like Tom Hayden and others, began to say, you know, we have a sneaking suspicion that when the military tells what happened in the Vietnam War and the history of the Vietnam War, they're probably going to leave some things out. Like, you know, the anti-Vietnam War movement. And so they organized and they got together and they made sure that the New York Times and others got wind of what was going on and brought to light what was going on. They happen to also work out of an office, so I have a little bit of insight into this. They recently had a meeting with the Pentagon where the Pentagon had to eat a little crow, kind of admit they got caught, and announced that they were going to incorporate the story of the anti-Vietnam War movement as well. They were going to bring in voices from the movement who fought the war, and they were going to do a whole different thing than they were planning to do. It can be done. We have to insist that that history be told. We have to insist that when we talk about heroes, when we talk about those who gave to their country, that we not insist that we don't talk about those who sacrificed in the military, but we not only talk about those, that we talk about the totality of how you give back to your country. That it is patriotic not only to fight a war, but to fight against a war. That it is heroism not only on the battlefield, but heroism when you help prevent there from being a battlefield. We can do that. We can make that happen. But if we simply sit back and bemoan the fact that it's not happening, it's never going to happen. But, you know, it is a challenge. We are going up against very high odds. But again, all the money in the world only gets you so much. You know, if having a lot of money solved problems, the Iraq War would have gone swimmingly well. At the end of the day, the thing that matters more than all of that money is what people think and what they believe. And if you organize, if you agitate, if you help create change, the great lyrics of the song, if you are the change you believe in, the change you've been waiting for, you really can make a difference.
I think the next thing that's going to happen is that the LEPOCO chorus is going to sing again, and that will be ending our evening together. Stephen will be outside. He said for those of you whose questions we were unable to answer in your cake, he would be happy to speak with you afterwards.